Hi Math 1 students. This video is to help those of you who need to do a retake on literal equations. And literal equations are really a topic that has shown up in a couple of modules, Module 4a and 4b. And it's solving an equation, but where your variables might be plentiful. You might have 2, 3, 4 variables, or perhaps even more. What we're going to do first in this video, and by the way, because this is distance learning right now, e-learning, you might want to print out a copy of this page if you have a printer at home. If not, just get some scratch paper and work alongside me. Let's take a look at these first problems. It says solve. Here there's really just no question about what we're solving for. We're solving for x. Now 7 is being multiplied to x. This is 7 times x. Anytime a number is next to a variable, there is implied multiplication. And if we want to get x alone, that's what it means to solve. What we have to do is undo that operation, undo that multiplication of 7, and therefore we're going to divide by that 7. And 14 divided by 7 is going to be a 2. Now, instead of jumping to number 2, I want us to take a look at number 4 real quickly. Because number 4 looks immensely harder at first glance. You'd say, well, wait a minute, I don't have a number in front of x. I have a variable. I have a. And if we're going to solve for x, it's the exact same concept, the exact same steps. We need to get x alone. So when you're looking at this a here, it's right next to x. That's implying that a is multiplied to x. So to get x alone, to get x all by itself, we have to get rid of that multiplication of a. How do we do that? The opposite of multiplying by a is dividing by a. Now here's where it's very different. Our answer isn't going to be a single solitary number like we did up above. Like in problem number 1, we'd get an answer like x equals 2. When we're solving literal equations, your answer will have other variables in it. And that might seem strange at first, but in all honesty, it's really no big deal. We just need to expect it. So let's go ahead and take a look at, say, number 2. We have x subtracting 3 equals 7. And my goodness, we want to get x alone. In other words, I don't want to see this minus 3 next to the x. We could add a 3. The opposite of subtraction is addition. And 7 plus 3, in one simple step, you can get x is equal to 10. Well, right now as we're solving for x, right below, you can see this problem looks way more abstract. It looks quite a bit different, doesn't it? But it's really the same problem. You want to get x alone, and you see that minus a, and you'd say, I don't want to see a minus a next to the x. I want to get rid of minus a. What's the opposite operation of subtracting an a? Well, adding an a. And you could see very quickly that your answer would be 4 plus an a, or you could have written that as a plus 4. Addition, guys, order really doesn't matter, does it? You could write 4 plus a, get full credit, write a plus 4. Likewise, you'd receive full credit. At the end of the day, though, both of these answers, they're equivalent. You're going to notice that they have an a in them. It's not just a single solitary numeral like we saw up above with problem 2. Let's take a look at number 3, shall we? We've got x plus 2 is equal to negative 5, and of course we're going to say x isn't alone. I have this addition of 2 What's the opposite of adding 2? Plain and simply, it's subtracting 2. Now, if you struggle with working with negatives, use a calculator, please. Thinking about this in terms of money can be helpful too. -5, hey, a bad situation financially. It's like having a $5 debt or a loss of $5. A -2, likewise, is a loss of $2 or a debt of $2. So think of it this way. You lost $5, you lost $2. Bad day overall, that means you lost 7. So X would be -7. A calculator would get you the same answer. When we come down to number 6, well, pretty much the same problem, right? You need to get X all by itself. You don't want to see a plus A. What's the opposite? The opposite operation of adding an A is subtracting an A. Our final answer could be written as -9 minus A. Now, by the way, you could also write that as -A minus 9. That would also work just as well. But this would suffice. Again, your answer is more than just a single numeral. It has the variable A in it. Well, let's take a look at solving for X. And I think you can see what we're really trying to do on this worksheet, guys. We are, without a doubt, trying to go to equations that you have solved in the past, where you've got all numbers, all numerals. And we'll revisit how we solve them, and then revisit a literal equation where you have additional variables. Take a look at this. 3x minus 8 equals 10. Remember, when we're solving an equation here, the very last thing we would have written on the left-hand side would have been that -8. We want to undo that. We're always going to, when we have a multiplication and an addition or subtraction, we always undo the addition or the subtraction first. So the opposite of subtracting 8 is adding an 8. And it won't take you long to see that 10 plus 8 is 18. And then we can divide by a 3, and we'll have x is equal to 6. And that works out rather nicely. But take a look down below. Very similar problem, but my goodness, this looks so much more difficult. You look at this, you have ax minus b equals 6, and you think, my goodness, how in the world do I work this out? Well, guys, I guess what I'm trying to show you is it's exactly like what we did with number 7. You know, x is being multiplied by a, but we also have that subtraction of a b. Get rid of the addition or the subtraction first. That's what we did earlier. We're going to add a b. You could say, well, this could be 6 plus b. By the way, you could also write that as b plus 6 if you'd like. Now, you're going to notice, guys, that what I'm writing right now is really a multiplied to x. That's really anytime a variable is next to a number. We've just talked about that. Or a variable next to a variable, that's implied multiplication. So to undo multiplying by a, we divide by a. And please realize your answer could be written as this fraction right here. We don't know what b or a happen to equal. We can't work this out to a single numeric value. All the same, our answer is fine. It's just 6 plus b all over a. Guys, when we're looking at number 8, very different kind of perspective. Remember how we talked about solving such an equation right here? Look at that left-hand side. We've got x plus 6 all over 2. Guys, the last thing that would have been done setting this equation up would have been dividing by 2. Very different when you get a whole fraction here. So what you do is you actually undo that division of 2. Might remember us doing that for a number of modules. And -4 times 2 is -8. And then right here we've got x plus 6 equals negative 8. Well, how do you undo a plus 6? Well, you got to subtract a 6. Negative 8 minus 6 is going to get you negative 14. You can check that with the calculator if needed. When you look at, say, number 11, very, very, very similar situation right here. Look at this left-hand side, guys. The last thing you would have written would be that b there. That's the last thing that you would have set the equation up with. When we're solving an equation, we're really undoing its setup. So that's why we can really go back and say, what's the last thing that occurred on this left-hand side? It's a division of b. So I'm going to multiply by a b here and multiply by a b here. What does that leave you with? Well, you have an x plus a on the left side. You could just write that as negative 4b right here. And wow, we are so close to wrapping this up. You know, we almost have x alone on the left-hand side, but we don't want to see a plus a, I am sorry. So what's the opposite of adding an a? Well, we're going to subtract that a. And what are we left with? Negative 4b minus an a. And that's as far as we go here. Guys, let's take a look at these last two things. A very nice scenario with number 9. Imagine that you're writing out this left-hand side. You have x over 4 minus 2. The very last thing you would have written would be a minus 2. We want to get rid of that. We can add a 2 to do that. We'll have x divided by 4. And negative 5 plus 2, you can check real quickly, is negative 3. Well, now we want to undo this division of 4. The opposite of dividing by 4 is multiplying by 4. And negative 3 times 4 is actually a negative 12. Let's real quickly take a look at number 12 here. Very, very comparable to what we see with number 9, isn't it? The very last thing you would have written on this left-hand side would be that minus b. So let's undo that minus b and add a b. And we don't know what negative 3 plus b is. We could just write it that way. But remember, our goal is to get x alone. X is divided by a. What is the opposite operation of dividing by a? Well, multiplying by a. But here's where we have to be very careful. We've talked about this before. Really, you're multiplying that entire side by a. That's why we need parentheses. Now, could you distribute that a in there? Of course. But this would be sufficient. This would be plenty good. I'm going to stop here. We're going to have a second video going over the second half as the problems get more complicated. But this problem right here is a nice stopping point. The back side's going to get more complicated. We'll pick that up in the next video.